When I arrived at my sister's wedding, my seat was behind a curtain. Her MIL smirked. Only real family gets a table. There wasn't even a place card for me. Her groom giggled. Guess you're just extra. I picked up my gift, stood up, and proclaimed, Cool, I'll take my extra $4,300 and go. Their faces dropped sooner than I expected. I, 32M, never thought I'd be writing this story, but here we are. 3 months have passed since the wedding that changed everything between my sister and me, and I'm still processing what happened. Let me start from the beginning. My sister and I weren't particularly close growing up, but we maintained a decent relationship as adults. When she got engaged last year, I was genuinely happy for her. She seemed excited about the wedding and kept mentioning how important it was to have family there. I took that to heart and started planning accordingly. The wedding was set to be a lavish affair at an upscale venue downtown. My sister had been planning it for over a year, and from what I could tell, no expense was being spared. She'd mentioned wanting everything to be perfect, and I respected that. When she asked me to be there early to help with any last-minute arrangements, I agreed without hesitation. 2 weeks before the wedding, I went shopping for a gift. I wanted to give them something meaningful and substantial to start their married life. After browsing through their registry and thinking about what would truly make a difference for them, I decided on a high-end kitchen appliance set they had their eye on, plus a generous cash contribution for their honeymoon. The total came to exactly $4,300. It was a significant amount for me, but I figured this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and she was my only sister. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather. I dressed in my best suit and arrived at the venue 45 minutes early, as requested. The place looked stunning with white flowers and elegant decorations everywhere. I felt proud of my sister for pulling together such a beautiful event. When I approached the entrance, an usher I didn't recognize asked for my name. I told him, and he checked his list with a confused expression. He asked me to wait a moment while he spoke to someone else. That someone else turned out to be the mother-in-law-to-be, a woman I'd met briefly at the engagement party but hadn't really spoken to at length. She walked over with a clipboard and looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. She informed me that there had been some changes to the seating arrangements and that I would need to follow her. I assumed she was leading me to a family table near the front, so I didn't question it initially. Instead, she led me through the main reception area, past beautifully decorated round tables with elegant centerpieces, past the head table where the wedding party would sit, and toward the very back of the venue. Behind a decorative curtain that partially obscured the view of the ceremony area, there was a small folding table with a single chair. I stared at the setup in confusion. There wasn't even a place card with my name on it. The table looked like an afterthought, something thrown together at the last minute. I asked if there had been some mistake, thinking perhaps this was temporary seating until they could fix whatever error had occurred. That's when the mother-in-law smiled in a way that made my stomach drop. She explained that only real family members get proper table assignments, and that this spot would be perfectly adequate for someone in my position. Her tone was so casual, as if she was discussing the weather rather than deliberately isolating me at my own sister's wedding. Before I could fully process what she'd said, the groom appeared beside her. I'd met him several times during their engagement and had always found him pleasant enough, though perhaps a bit immature for someone in his 30s. He looked at the setup and actually giggled before suggesting that I was just extra anyway, so the seating arrangement was probably appropriate. The word extra hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, having taken time off work, driven 4 hours to get here, and spent a considerable amount of money on their gift, only to be treated like an unwelcome addition to their special day. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. I looked around the reception area one more time, taking in the elegant tables, the beautiful flowers, and the obvious care that had gone into planning every detail. Every detail except for where to put the groom's sister-in-law, apparently. The contrast between the lavish setup for everyone else and my hidden corner behind a curtain was stark and unmistakable. Something clicked in my mind at that moment. I realized this wasn't an oversight or a mistake due to venue constraints. This was intentional. They had deliberately planned to minimize my presence at the wedding, to make me as invisible as possible while still being able to say I was technically there. I walked back to my car and retrieved the large gift box from the trunk. It was heavy and wrapped in expensive paper with an elaborate bow. I'd been so excited to give it to them, imagining their faces when they opened it, and saw how much thought I'd put into selecting something perfect for their new life together. Walking back into the venue with the gift box in my arms, I noticed other guests starting to arrive. They were being warmly greeted and shown to beautifully set tables with proper place cards and elegant chair covers. The contrast with my own reception was impossible to ignore. I made my way back to where the mother-in-law and groom were still standing, apparently discussing some other wedding logistics. When they saw me approaching with the gift, their expressions changed slightly. The groom looked almost eager, probably wondering what was inside the beautifully wrapped box. I set the gift down on the nearest proper table and looked directly at both of them. I announced that since I was apparently just extra, I figured I should take my extra gift with me as well. I mentioned the specific dollar amount I'd spent, making sure they understood exactly what they were losing by treating me this way. The change in their expressions was immediate and dramatic. The mother-in-law's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of shock and panic. The groom's face went pale, and he started to stammer something about the seating arrangement being a misunderstanding. But I was done with misunderstandings. I picked up the gift box and told them I hoped they enjoyed their perfect wedding with their real family members. I wished them well and started walking toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear the groom calling my name, asking me to wait, trying to explain that there had been some kind of mix-up. The mother-in-law was saying something about finding me a better seat, suddenly very concerned about my comfort and happiness. I didn't turn around. I walked straight to my car, loaded the gift into the trunk, and drove home. For hours of driving gave me plenty of time to think about what had just happened and whether I'd made the right decision. Update 1. The call started before I even made it home. My phone rang continuously during the drive, but I didn't answer. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had 17 missed calls and twice as many text messages. Most of the calls were from my sister, with several from the groom, and even a few from the mother-in-law. The text messages ranged from confused to angry to desperate. My sister was demanding to know where I was and why I wasn't at the ceremony. The groom was insisting that everything could be worked out if I just came back. The mother-in-law was suddenly very apologetic and claimed the seating arrangement had been a terrible mistake. I turned off my phone and spent the evening returning the gift items to the store. The kitchen appliances were easy enough to return, and I was able to get a full refund since I had all the original packaging and receipts. The cash portion I simply kept, figuring I could put it towards something more worthwhile than funding the honeymoon of people who clearly didn't value my presence. The next morning, I finally listened to some of the voicemails. My sister's messages progressed from confused to furious over the course of the evening. In her final message, left around midnight, she accused me of ruining her wedding day and being selfish and dramatic. She claimed that everyone was asking where I was and that I had embarrassed her in front of all her guests. The groom's messages were different in tone. He seemed genuinely panicked and kept apologizing, saying his mother had overstepped and that they really wanted me there. He mentioned multiple times how much the gift would have meant to them and how sorry he was about the seating situation. The mother-in-law's voicemails were the most interesting. Her tone completely shifted from the smugness I'd witnessed at the venue to desperate damage control. She claimed there had been a miscommunication with the wedding planner and that my assigned seat had been moved by mistake. She promised that if I came to the reception, everything would be fixed and I'd have a seat of honor at the family table. I didn't believe a word of it. Instead, I spent the day doing things I enjoyed. I went for a long hike, had a nice dinner at my favorite restaurant, and watched movies at home. It was actually a quite pleasant Saturday, much better than sitting behind a curtain watching a ceremony where I clearly wasn't wanted. Update 2. The following week was when things got really interesting. My sister called me on Tuesday, after they'd returned from their mini honeymoon weekend. Her tone was completely different from the angry voicemails she'd left on Saturday night. She apologized profusely and claimed she had no idea what had happened with the seating arrangement. According to her version of events, she had specifically requested that I be seated at the family table, and she was horrified to learn that I'd been placed behind a curtain instead. She blamed her new mother-in-law entirely and insisted that she would never have approved such treatment. I listened to her explanation, but something about it didn't ring true. The seating arrangement for a wedding isn't something that happens by accident, especially not at a venue that clearly prides itself on attention to detail. Someone had to specifically decide where every guest would sit, and someone had to approve the decision to put me in that hidden corner. When I pressed her on the details, asking how such a mistake could have happened without her knowledge, her story became less consistent. She claimed she'd been too busy with other wedding preparations to review the final seating chart personally. But then she also said she'd specifically told the wedding planner to put me at the family table. Those two things couldn't both be true. The groom called me later that same day with his own version of events. He was even more apologetic than my sister had been and took full responsibility for not catching the seating error before the wedding. He offered to take me out to an expensive dinner to make up for the whole situation, and he mentioned several times how much they could have used the gift money for their new apartment. That last part was what really confirmed my suspicions. If this had truly been an innocent mistake, he wouldn't have been so focused on the financial aspect of my gift. The fact that he kept bringing up the money suggested that they had known exactly what they were risking when they treated me poorly. I declined both his dinner invitation and my sister's request to talk things through in person. I told them both that I needed time to process what had happened and that I wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine just yet. Update 3. About 3 weeks after the wedding, I learned the full truth about what had really happened. It came from an unexpected source. One of my sister's college friends who had been at the wedding and witnessed the entire aftermath of my departure. She reached out to me through social media, saying she felt I deserved to know what had really gone on behind the scenes. According to her, my seating arrangement hadn't been a mistake at all. She had overheard a conversation between my sister and her mother-in-law during the wedding planning process, where they discussed how to minimize my presence without actually uninviting me. The reasoning, as she understood it, was that my sister wanted to maintain the appearance of family unity while also appeasing her new mother-in-law, who apparently didn't approve of me for reasons that were never entirely clear. The solution they came up with was to technically include me in the wedding while making my presence as unobtrusive as possible. What made this revelation even more painful was learning that they had anticipated I might not react well to the seating arrangement. They had apparently discussed the possibility that I would be upset and had decided that dealing with my reaction was preferable to dealing with the mother-in-law's disapproval of having me seated prominently. The friend also told me about the chaos that erupted after I left. Apparently, several other guests had noticed the empty seat behind the curtain and had asked where I was. When word spread that I'd left because of how I was treated, it created significant tension at the reception. Multiple family members were upset to learn how I'd been seated, and there were some heated discussions about the appropriateness of the arrangement. The groom's family was apparently embarrassed by his mother's behavior, especially after they learned about the significant gift I'd intended to give. Several of them approached my sister during the reception to ask why I hadn't been treated better, creating exactly the kind of family drama she'd been trying to avoid. This information reframed everything that had happened. My sister's subsequent apologies weren't born from genuine remorse, but from embarrassment at being caught. They hadn't expected me to actually leave, and they certainly hadn't expected other people to notice and judge their treatment of me. Armed with this knowledge, I made a decision about how to handle their continued attempts to reconcile. When my sister called the following Friday, asking again if we could meet to discuss everything, I agreed. But this time, I was prepared. I met her at a coffee shop near my apartment, neutral territory where we could speak privately. She came with the same story she'd been telling for weeks, that my seating arrangement had been a mistake, that she'd been too busy to notice, and that she was devastated by how things had turned out. I let her finish her entire explanation before telling her what I'd learned from her friend. I watched her face change as she realized that her version of events was falling apart. The careful story she'd constructed about miscommunication and oversight couldn't hold up against the detailed account of their actual planning process. For the first time since the wedding, she was completely honest with me. She admitted that she had known about the seating arrangement and had agreed to it because she was afraid of starting her marriage with conflict with her new mother-in-law. She said she had hoped I would just accept the situation quietly and that we could all move on without any drama. The most hurtful part of her confession was when she admitted that they had counted on my gift regardless of how they treated me. They had assumed that as family, I would give them the wedding present no matter what, and that any hurt feelings could be smoothed over afterward. I told her that she had been right about one thing. I probably would have quietly accepted poor treatment if that's all it had been. But the casual cruelty of calling me extra and the obvious pleasure they took in excluding me had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Final update. That conversation at the coffee shop was 6 weeks ago now, and it was the last real discussion my sister and I have had. She made one final attempt to convince me that we could repair our relationship, offering to have me over for dinner and promising that things would be different going forward. I declined, not because I wanted to punish her indefinitely, but because I realized that this incident had revealed something fundamental about how she viewed our relationship. To her, I was someone who could be taken for granted, someone whose feelings were less important than avoiding conflict with other people, someone who would always be there regardless of how I was treated. The $4,300 I had planned to spend on their gift went toward a vacation to Europe instead. I spent 2 weeks visiting places I'd always wanted to see, staying in nice hotels, and eating at excellent restaurants. It was exactly the kind of trip I'd been putting off for years because I was always spending money on other people's milestones and celebrations. While I was traveling, I got postcards and small gifts for the family members who had always treated me well, people who had noticed my absence from the wedding and had reached out to check on me afterward. It felt good to invest in relationships that were reciprocal rather than one-sided. My sister did send me a few text messages while I was abroad, mostly photos of their new apartment and updates about their married life. I responded politely but briefly. I didn't ignore her completely, but I also didn't pretend that everything was back to normal between us. The groom tried a different approach, sending me a friend request on social media along with a message about wanting to start fresh. I didn't accept the request or respond to the message. Whatever relationship we might have had was collateral damage from the wedding situation, and I didn't see any benefit in trying to rebuild it. The mother-in-law, interestingly enough, never contacted me directly again after that first weekend. I heard through family members that she had tried to blame the whole situation on a miscommunication with the wedding venue, but by that point, too many people knew the real story for her narrative to hold up. Looking back on everything that happened, I don't regret my decision to leave the wedding. Yes, it created drama and hurt feelings, but those consequences stemmed from their choices, not mine. I had been prepared to celebrate their marriage generously and enthusiastically, but only if I was welcomed as a valued family member rather than tolerated as an inconvenience. The most important thing I learned from this experience was the value of setting boundaries and enforcing them consistently. For years, I had been the family member who always showed up, always contributed, and always put other people's comfort ahead of my own. The wedding situation taught me that this pattern wasn't sustainable and that people will take advantage of your generosity if you let them. I'm still open to rebuilding my relationship with my sister if she's ever genuinely interested in doing the work required. But it would have to be a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. And frankly, I'm not holding my breath for that conversation to happen. In the meantime, I'm enjoying the extra $4,300 and the knowledge that I stood up for myself when it mattered. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is showing them the natural consequences of their actions, even when that someone is family. The wedding was supposed to be the beginning of their happily ever after, but for me, it was the beginning of a much healthier approach to family relationships. And that, ironically, might be worth more than any wedding gift I could have given them.